The sound was sickeningly loud in the silent auditorium, a hollow crack of metal striking bone. I was on the floor, a white-hot agony screaming up my arm, the world a blur of dress uniforms and shocked faces. My stepmother, Jeanette, a woman whose temper was a loaded weapon, stood over me, panting, the bent folding chair still gripped in her hands. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Military police were already moving, their boots thudding on the polished floor, but a single voice stopped them cold. Enough? It was Lieutenant General Matthews, a man whose presence was an event in itself. His voice carrying the weight of 3 stars and a lifetime of command. He was on his feet, his expression like granite. He pointed a rigid, unwavering finger directly at Jeanette. MP, secure that woman. As they hauled her away, protesting, the general's gaze swept across the stunned audience, and it landed squarely on my father. His next words cut through the remaining silence. For those of you who don't know this soldier, let me be clear. She's nothing. She's Captain Eva Rostova, call sign Wraith. That name, that impossible name hung in the air. The legendary call sign whispered about in secure briefings, a ghost in the intelligence community. It was a word my family could never, ever associate with me. An hour earlier, the humiliation was quieter, but no less sharp. My father, Robert, a retired sergeant who measured his worth in stories from 20 years ago, was holding court with his old buddies near the entrance. He waved me over with a proud, dismissive gesture. "Guys, this is my daughter, Eva," he announced, clapping me on my good shoulder. "Yeah, she's the one getting the award today." He leaned in conspiratorially, his voice a loud whisper. "She does all the, IT support for the Signal Corps. Keeps the printers running overseas, right?" He winked, and his friends offered a few polite, condescending chuckles. I stood there, my dress uniform suddenly feeling like a costume, the lie stinging worse than any physical wound. It wasn't just the lie itself, it was the casual ease with which he delivered it. It was the same tone he used when he forgot my graduation date, the same casual dismissal from when I tried to explain my officer training. I looked past him and saw the man he'd just spoken to, my direct commanding officer. Colonel Davies, a man who had personally signed off on my clandestine operations. The colonel's eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, his face a perfect mask of neutrality, but I saw it. He knew. My father chuckled, thinking it was just another harmless jab. He had no idea he'd just reduced my entire career to a punchline in front of the one man who had to read my classified after-to-action reports. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the 2 wars I was fighting. One in the mountains of Afghanistan, and the other in my own family. For years, I lived a life neatly cleaved in 2, separated by a wall of their ignorance and my silence. On one side was the world they understood, the world they chose to see. I remember a dinner 6 months before the ceremony, at some loud, generic steakhouse. The occasion was to celebrate my stepbrother Mark, the family's undisputed golden boy, who had just been named Salesman of the Month at his Ford dealership. My father and Jeanette were beaming, raising glasses of cheap sparkling wine to toast his incredible ambition and drive. The praise was so thick, you could have cut it with a steak knife. Caught up in a rare moment of feeling included, I decided to share my own news. I cleared my throat and mentioned that I'd been selected to lead a specialized joint task force intelligence unit, a position normally held by a more senior officer. Jeanette gave me a thin, placid smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "More computer games? Just make sure all that screen time doesn't make you forget to call your father." And just like that, the conversation pivoted back to Mark, to commissions and quotas, and the thrilling world of car sales. I felt the familiar cold wave wash over me. It was the same feeling I got when they used the money saved for my college textbooks to buy Mark a new set of golf clubs, or when they celebrated his community college graduation with more fanfare than my officer commissioning. My achievement was a ghost at their table. But on the other side of that wall, my other life was anything but a game. It was a world of absolute reality, measured in seconds and lives. I remember one night in a skiff overseas, a sterile, silent room, where the only light came from the glow of a dozen monitors. The air was frigid, smelling of ozone and stale coffee. A voice, calm and professional, crackled in my headset. "Wraith, we have chatter indicating a complex attack planned for grid Kilo 7. ETA is 15 mics. My eyes scanned the data streams. UAV feeds, signals intercepts, human intelligence reports trickling in from assets on the ground. Everything pointed to Kilo 7. It was a perfect setup. Too perfect. "Negative," I stated, my own voice just as calm, betraying none of the frantic calculations happening in my head. "The K7 chatter is a feint. The primary target is the forward aid station. They're using a ghost signal to draw our ISR assets away." I pointed to a flicker of anomalous data on my screen, a signal that was there and then gone, too faint for the automated systems to flag. "Retask a QRF to the aid station. Priority flash. Tell them to look for a blue truck." A tense silence followed. It was my call, my entire reputation on the line. Then, on the drone feed, we saw it. A blue pickup truck, laden with explosives, careening towards the medical tent. The quick reaction force intercepted it with less than a minute to spare. 30 lives, medics, wounded soldiers, were saved because of that call. My team leader didn't throw a party. He didn't make a toast. He simply caught my eye over the encrypted comms channel and gave me a single, slow nod. That silent gesture, that acknowledgement of pure competence from a man I respected, was more real and more valuable than a decade's worth of my family's hollow praise. It was the currency of my real world. My father, Robert, was the chief enabler of their narrative. He was a retired supply sergeant who, I suspect, had spent his entire career feeling overlooked and outmaneuvered by commissioned officers. My success, my rank, wasn't a source of pride for him. It was a quiet, personal affront. He never said it, of course, but it was there in the way he'd dismiss my career, the way he'd let Jeanette's comments slide without a word. Once, after she'd been particularly vicious, I confronted him. He just sighed, that weary, put-upon sigh he used whenever things got difficult. "You know how she is, Eva," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "She just wants what's best for Mark. His life is, well, it's simpler to understand." For years, I had accepted my two separate lives. I was Captain Rostova to the army, and just Eva to my family. But when their world was forced to collide with mine, I decided I would no longer be the one to manage the fallout. I would finally let the truth speak for itself. The decision wasn't made in a moment of anger, but in the sterile, antiseptic quiet of a hospital room in Landstuhl, Germany. Lying there with my arm held together by pins and plates, I had a moment of absolute clarity. The pain from the IED blast was a dull, constant throb, but the emotional pain from a lifetime of being dismissed was sharp and insistent. I realized then that I had been trying to win an emotional war with people who only respected tactical victories. So, I would give them one. The upcoming Purple Heart ceremony would not be another family event for them to endure. It would be a formal correction of the record, a tactical operation to reclaim my own identity using the only language my father truly understood: protocol and rank. Back stateside, I immersed myself in the planning. I used my position as the awardee to liaise directly with the base protocol office, giving me quiet oversight of the entire event. It felt familiar, like planning a mission. I reviewed the sequence of events, the guest manifests, the speaker's notes. With the calm precision of filling out an operational request, I submitted a formal addendum. My full, unclassified award citation was to be read aloud, in its entirety. It wasn't just about the medal, it was about the words, the official, undeniable narrative of what I had done, a story that would be entered into the permanent record. Of course, the words themselves wouldn't be enough. They needed to be delivered by an authority they could not question or diminish. I contacted my CO, Colonel Davies, and explained the situation with professional brevity. I told him I needed an unimpeachable voice to present the award, to give the citation the gravity it deserved. He was a man of few words, but he understood my world and the shadows of the one I came from. He didn't hesitate. I later learned he made a personal call to Lieutenant General Matthews's aide, framing the request as a matter of unit honor. He knew the right words to use, the right channels to go through. The general's office confirmed his attendance the next day. The primary piece was in place. The final detail was the bait. I went through the list of distinguished guests and added one more name to my personal manifest, Sergeant Major Price, a 90-year-old decorated veteran from the Korean War, a man I deeply admired. I formally listed myself as his personal escort for the duration of the ceremony. It was a small, respectful gesture, but I knew my stepmother Jeanette. An act of public service and honor directed toward anyone but her or her son would be an intolerable slight. I was setting the stage, creating the conditions for a predictable outcome. The invitations were sent via official channels. The RSVPs came back, my father's dripping with condescending pride that he would get to see his little girl get a medal. They had no idea they were entering my world by my invitation to witness my authority. The base theater was a cathedral of military tradition. Rows upon rows of soldiers sat in their dress uniforms, spines straight, a sea of perfectly aligned discipline. The air was thick with a solemn, unspoken respect, the kind of quiet, reverence reserved for places where honor is the only currency. Into this sacred space, my family arrived. They were late, of course, shuffling in and finding their seats with a disruptive rustle of civilian clothing that seemed jarringly out of place. My father, Robert, my stepmother, Jeanette, and my stepbrother, Mark, were dressed as if for a casual brunch, jeans, polo shirts, a complete and utter misreading of the room. They were so profoundly out of their depth, so blind to the rigid honor of the world they had just entered. I heard Jeanette whisper loudly to my father, her voice cutting through the quiet dignity. "I can't believe we have to sit through all this for a scratch on her arm." The ceremony proceeded with its formal, rhythmic grace. Names were called, citations were read, and soldiers walked proudly across the stage. The stories of their service filled the room, each one a testament to sacrifice. I felt a growing sense of calm, a feeling of belonging that I never felt at my own family's dinner table. This was my world. These were my people. Then, the announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. "Captain Eva Rostova." I took a steadying breath and rose to my feet. As I did, I saw him. Sergeant Major Price, the elderly Korean War veteran I so admired, struggling to push himself up out of his seat to applaud. His hands trembled with age, but his eyes were sharp and clear. Protocol be damned. Instead of walking toward the stage, I turned and walked to him. I leaned in and quietly offered him my good arm to steady him as he stood. He took it, giving me a grateful, wrinkled smile. A soft, appreciative ripple of applause went through the auditorium, a quiet acknowledgement of the gesture, of respect flowing between generations of service. It was a small, warm moment, and for my stepmother, it was the final trigger. She saw the respect. She saw the honor being afforded to me, the invisible child, the family footnote, and something inside of her shattered. In a flash of pure, unrestrained fury, she leaped from her seat, grabbed an empty folding chair from the aisle, and let out a guttural scream that ripped through the solemnity. "You always have to be the center of attention. You're still nothing but trash." She swung the chair with all the force she could muster. I barely had time to turn before it slammed into my injured arm. A sickening crack, sharp and wet, echoed through the theater, followed by a collective gasp from 1,000 people at once. I collapsed, the world dissolving into a blinding, white-hot universe of pain. But before the MPs could even tackle her, the general was on his feet. His voice was not a yell. It was a physical force that seized control of the entire room. Enough. The word hit like a shockwave. MP, secure that woman. As they restrained a suddenly struggling Jeanette, General Matthews strode to the lectern. He didn't look at me on the floor or at the medics rushing to my side. He turned to the audience, but his eyes burned a hole directly through my father. For those of you who don't know this soldier, he began, his voice low and seething with a righteous authority. Let me be clear. She's no nothing. She is Captain Eva Rostova, call sign Wraith. The world stopped. That arm your wife just shattered, he continued, his voice rising, with controlled fury, was first broken by shrapnel from an IED. Shrapnel she took while shielding her sergeant from the blast and pulling him from a burning vehicle under active enemy fire. He picked up my citation, holding it up for all to see. This award is not for a scratch. It is for exceptional valor that led to the dismantling of an entire insurgent network, saving the 17 souls in her unit's forward operating base from a catastrophic attack. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. My father's face had drained of all color, leaving behind a pale, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. As if pulled by invisible strings, he involuntarily straightened his back, his body snapping into a posture of rigid attention he hadn't held in 20 years. The name, Wraith. It was a call sign he'd surely heard in rumors from his active duty contacts, a ghost operator, a legend. And it was his daughter. Jeanette was frozen in the grip of the MPs, her face a canvas of dawning horror, as the true weight of her actions finally crashed down upon her. She hadn't just assaulted her stepdaughter, she had assaulted a decorated war hero, a federal officer, on a military installation in front of her commanding general. My father had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. In the end, it only took a 2-syllable call sign for him to finally understand my true stature. The world swam back into focus not with a bang, but with a quiet, determined calm. Jeanette was gone, escorted out in handcuffs, the sound of her frantic, useless protests fading down the hall. The ceremony had halted, suspended in the aftermath of her chaos. Medics were at my side, their voices low and professional as they assessed my arm, but my attention was on the figures surrounding me, my unit, my team, my real family. They had formed a protective circle, shielding me from the stares of the crowd. General Matthews was kneeling beside me, his 3-star rank forgotten in a simple act of human decency. We'll finish this properly, Captain, he promised, his voice firm. I promise. Across the auditorium, I saw my father and Mark. They were standing alone, adrift in a sea of silent judgment. No one spoke to them. No one even looked at them. They had become ghosts in a room that suddenly saw me with perfect clarity, the weight of 1,000 pairs of eyes, all filled with a mixture of pity and contempt for them, was a tangible force. They didn't say a word to me. They didn't even try to approach. They just turned and walked out of the theater, 2 specters evaporating from a life they were no longer a part of. In the end, their exit wasn't dramatic. It was just an empty, silent admission of defeat. 18 months later, a maintenance worker was carefully affixing a new nameplate to an office door at the Army Intelligence Center of Excellence. It read, Major Eva Wraith Rostova, Lead Instructor, Advanced Signals Analysis. I was no longer just recovered. I had been promoted, recognized, and given one of the most vital tasks in my field, shaping the next generation of intelligence operators. My new office was sparse but functional, the walls a clean slate except for 2 framed items hanging side by side. One was my Purple Heart, its deep purple ribbon a testament to a wound that had finally healed, both inside and out. The other was a personal letter of commendation from General Matthews, detailing the events of that day and reaffirming the Army's gratitude. They were my new family heirlooms, earned with blood and validated by honor. This was my real legacy, not a name, but an action. My new family wasn't bound by blood but by a shared sense of purpose and a deep current of mutual respect. I saw them every day in the state-of-the-art classroom where I taught. They were sharp, dedicated young officers, hungry to learn, their minds like finely tuned instruments. There was an easy rapport between us, a camaraderie built on a foundation of competence and trust, not broken obligation. We would spend hours debating complex intelligence problems, dissecting enemy tactics, and preparing them for the silent, high-stakes world they were about to enter. In their respectful attention, in their sharp questions, I found the belonging that had eluded me for a lifetime. This was a team. This was a tribe. This was home. One afternoon, as I was reviewing lesson plans, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from a number I barely recognized, but I knew who it was. It was my father. The message was short, each word heavy with years of unspoken baggage. Eva, they sentenced Jeanette today. I've been reading about your work, what they say you did. I'm sorry, I never knew. I read the words once, then a second time. I waited for a surge of anger, or maybe a satisfying sting of victory. But there was nothing, just a quiet, calm finality. He never knew, because he never asked. He never saw because he never looked. His apology wasn't a key to unlock a door I had closed. It was just a faint knock on a wall that was no longer there. I pressed my thumb to the screen, held it over the message, and tapped archive. I put the phone down, face down, and turned my attention back to the young lieutenant who was waiting to ask me a question. My peace was no longer a negotiation. My father believed a legacy was something you pass down. I learned a true legacy is something you build in silence, and have acknowledged by your actions. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.